The human organism has infinite possibilities that scientists do not even remotely suspect. When the physical body plunges into the fourth dimension, it can assume any shape and even abandon parts of their bodies. Witches have a long and elaborate history. His predecessors appear in the Bible, in the story of King Saul consulting the so-called Witch of Endor. They also appear in the classical period in the form of sturges, fearsome winged creatures in the shape of harpies or owls that fed on the flesh of babies. Numerous references, especially literary, testify to the continuous practice of witchcraft during antiquity. The goddess Hecate was the one who then directed witchcraft and enchantments, and certain regions and certain places were considered passage points to the infernal world, and were associated with areas such as swamps, lakes, cemeteries, and forests. In the ancient world, Thessaly is known as the quintessential home of witchcraft. In antiquity, the existence of certain people who, through complex rituals, could alter the laws of nature at will, including the border between life and death, was easily accepted. But on some occasions they were considered dangerous to the social order. Thessalian sorceresses were reputed to be especially skilled, and their enchantments were numerous and powerful. Perhaps the most recurring prodigy attributed to them was the ability to hijack the moon from the firmament. According to Apuleius in his best-known work, The Golden Ass, the witches of Thessaly did not hesitate to use the most abject rituals to achieve their ends, being able to transform into birds, dogs, and even flies to enter houses where someone had died and steal the entrails of the deceased, which they later used in their ceremonies. According to Albrecht Dürer in his engraving, The Four Witches, the witches could be young, attractive, and agile, capable of captivating men. On the contrary, in his engraving, Witch Riding Backwards on a Goat, it could be old and abominable. This, according to many stories, witches were capable of being extremely long-lived, but their bodies aged like anyone else. But one of the powers that witches had was being able to change their appearance into that of a young maiden. But where did the Renaissance artists get the model for this eerie vision? One theory is that Dürer and his contemporaries were inspired by the personification of invidia, envy, as envisioned by the Italian artist Andrea Mantegna. The belief that witches made pacts with the devil can be found in the writings of St. Augustine, but it did not spread to Western Europe until the 9th century, when various legends about such pacts were translated into Latin. In these, a person could enter into an agreement similar to a legal contract, whereby the devil provided health or another form of earthly power in exchange for services and power over his soul after death. In some cases, the pact implied magical practices. The link between magic and the demonic pact became more apparent in the 12th and 13th centuries. Magic, which used the spell and control of demons, was called necromancy, a term that meant evoking the spirits of the dead. Among the faculties that witches are said to have is that of being able to fly. The question of flights provided an explanation for the witches' ability to attend secret nocturnal meetings in remote areas without their absence being detected. When the coven took place in distant countries and the number of participants was exceptionally large, the belief in the ability of witches to fly was used as a necessary corollary. Of all the witches' means of transportation, the most frequently cited has been the broom, which represents a principle of the female sex and thus shows the preponderance of witches over wizards. Witches were sometimes depicted flying through the wind or by their own forces. In the meetings of witches and wizards, or as it is also known as covens, they meet in order to conjure spells and worship the various divinities of pagan religions. In Christianity, they are often associated with devil-worshipping circles or demonic figures, as well as malevolent intent. In a satanic coven, a series of stages are experienced, these being the summons, where the spells that will attract the devil are pronounced, the homage to the devil, in which an offering is made or danced, the black mass, and the orgy. Finally, a banquet was held, where the sorcerers ate part of other sorcerers already dead or the victims of their evil spells. The witching hour is generally thought to begin at midnight, although 3 a.m. is considered by some to be the witching hour. Due to this same relationship that was given to witches and wizards with the devil, it was one of the causes for the beginning of the witch hunt, a historical phenomenon that occurred mainly in Europe and America between the 15th century and the 17th century, in which thousands of people, mainly women, were executed for practicing witchcraft, including in that term a wide series of acts and circumstances, from the medicine practiced by women, the elaboration of concoctions and medicines, divination and magic, to sexual behaviors and rejected by the religious authorities. The most important treatise ever published in the context of the witch persecution in the Renaissance was the Malleus Maleficarum. It was written and compiled by two German Dominican monks, Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Sprenger. This book was one of the most famous during the modern age. Since over 3 centuries, it became the indispensable manual for the Inquisition in the fight against witchcraft in Europe and America, which would give rise to the so-called witch hunts. One of the most famous witch trials in history happened in Salem, Massachusetts, during the winter and spring of 1692 to 1693. When it was all over, 141 suspects, both men and women, were tried as witches. 19 were executed by hanging. 1 was pressed to death by heavy stones. The persecution against witches or alleged witches was one of the darkest pages in the history of humanity, which ended the lives of thousands of people. During the time of the Inquisition, unusual cases of witchcraft are reported, such as the case of 2 women who were accused before the Inquisition, and when the clergymen and guards entered the women's house, they only saw 4 legs on a bed, since the bodies were not there. The clergy proceeded liturgically with exorcisms and conjurations of all kinds. Suddenly, something strange happens. 2 horrible birds enter that room before the astonished clerics, and then rush into the bed where the legs lay. The clerics, horrified and surprised to see that those birds of bad omen assumed human forms. Those legs then became part of the group of those women who moments before were only sinister aerial creatures. The Inquisition processed these witches, and they were sentenced to die at the stake. In another story, some people found several pairs of legs among the ashes of a stove or of the large braziers that were used in the mansions of that time. Frightened by such a discovery, they waited to see what would happen, and were surprised that some time later, witches came back on their broomsticks without legs and put them back on by magic. They celebrated a strange rite right there and went home like any normal people. There is no doubt that these are simply witches who know how to put their physical body inside the 4th dimension, either to fly through the air, to walk on the water, or to attend their horrifying covens. We have been told that these gruesome creatures can leave their physical legs at will to fly in the air more comfortably. That witches can abandon their legs or transform into beasts is not a new case. Already Aeneas, the Trojan, found in the Strophiades Islands, those birds headed by the abominable Cellino, who caused him so much harm. At present, witches are part of folklore in many countries and regions, especially in small towns, where there are endless stories that involve these characters, especially within the older population. Because who has not heard any of these stories from her grandparents who swear that the existence of witches is real? And you? Do you believe in witches?